Okay. Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Eruvin, 1 week at a time. This is our 42nd lesson, and today we will be reviewing Daf Samech Vav 66 through Ein Bet through 72. We have a lot to go through today. I think that the dapim are getting quite complicated or intricate. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to review the daf together with you. I have a number of pictures and even a chart for us. So I'm looking forward to learning with you. Also, interestingly enough, as we'll see in this week's dapim, as we get to the middle of the Masechet, we are going to surprisingly be learning the fundamental aspects of Eruvin. One would think that we would learn them at the beginning of the Masechet, but one would be wrong. What's so interesting about Gemara, and I think it's important to understand that we talk about the Talmud as being a sea, Yam Shel Talmud, and the sea being something that doesn't really have a beginning and an end. It's just this large expanse. And we're really going to see that because, on Daf 70 is where we're going to actually be explained what it means to make an Eruv and how we go about doing it, even though we have been talking about it for 70 days now. So, okay, let's start on 66 on Samech Vav. And we ended last week talking about renting the rights of the courtyard from a non-Jew, and our daf starts by telling us on 66 this idea that renting is equivalent to making an eruv, and therefore you could even do it for a nominal fee. The Gemara talks about less than a pruta, meaning it's nominal. You do not have to rent the rights for large sums of money. It could be only, technical and not necessarily very serious. And an employee can join in the Eruv or rent out the rights of the courtyard for the person that he works for. And one Jew can rent from the non-Jew on behalf of everyone. And that was something we were talking about last week. And this week a little bit less. This week we're going to actually talk about when we can rent the rights. Can we do it on Shabbat? And now, let me share my screen with you. We're going to look at some pictures of different how living arrangements and how. Hold on one second. Let me just open up the chat box in case somebody has a question. Okay. Can everybody? I hope you can see my. Can you see my screen? Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Okay. So if we see here, the Gemara on 66 talks about this concept of an inner courtyard and an outer courtyard. And here we see that, again, the road is here at the bottom of the picture. We have this outer courtyard, and then you go through the outer courtyard into an inner courtyard. Usually when we've been talking about different setups, it used to be, let's say, one courtyard, and then that opened up into an alleyway or to a street. Here, the inner courtyard has to walk through the outer courtyard in order to get to the street. And therefore, the Gemara says that when people forbid each other, then they can make an Eruv, and they can also relinquish their rights. And the Gemara explains that this is talking about an inner courtyard and an outer courtyard, right? And the inner courtyard forbids the outer courtyard from making an Eruv, and therefore they all have to make the Eruv together because we actually view it as one unit, at least from we'll leave it at that. We'll get to the details in a minute. However, if you have this case, right, which is two courtyards that are adjacent and connected, but they each have an exit to the main street, to the Reshut Harabim. So when you can make an Eruv, but you don't forbid each other, right? These people, in theory, can make an Eruv together, but they don't forbid each other because they each have their own exit to the street. Then they cannot relinquish rights from one to the other. And we'll discuss the details of this again as we continue. And the last case that we have here is that if you forbid each other and you can't make an Eruv, and this is the case of the non-Jew living with the Jews, because again, we said he cannot relinquish his rights. Rather, he has to actually rent out his portion to the people who live with him, and therefore he cannot just relinquish his rights. We have a statement here which I think is just important for our general Talmudic knowledge, and that is this idea about Rabbi Yossi, who says, I don't remember this teaching, and Abaye says, oh no, Rabbi Yossi, you're the one who taught it to us. It's important, this does come up often. Rabbi Yossi, unfortunately, seems to have had either a stroke or some sort of cerebral complication where he forgets all of his Torah learning. Maybe it's dementia, which is very sad. And the Gemara actually discusses it and has Rabbi Yossi saying, I don't remember this idea. And Abaye is generally the one who reminds him. And Abaye says, oh, no, you're the one who taught us this. And he says, oh, thank you so much for reminding me. So I think I guess it's interesting to know about the lives of the Talmudic sages. Okay, let's continue. The Gemara continues and says that, and we'll see this more later on tonight, this idea of the relationship between the alleyway and the courtyards, and the courtyard to the houses, right? So we have, again, many courtyards that open up into an alleyway, into the mavui, and many houses that open up into a courtyard. So they're parallel, and we're going to see how parallel as we continue our class today. The Gemara continues and says that there's actually a machloket, a difference of opinion, if one chatzer can be mevatel, meaning can relinquish its rights to another chatzer, right? So that's this case here where you have two courtyards. We talked about relinquishing rights within one courtyard. Can you actually relinquish your rights to another courtyard? And that's a difference of opinion. Rabbi Yochanan says yes, it does work, though there are others that say no. Let's go back to our inner and outer courtyard. Interestingly, the Gemara on 66 talks about the relationship between the inner ones and the outer ones. How do we make an Eruv? What happens if you forgot? So here we go. If the Eruv was put in the outer courtyard, right? So they decide, let's say, looking at this picture, let's say there are 4 houses. They decide to all make an Eruv and put it in one of the outer houses. But if someone forgot to join the Eruv, it messes everybody up. And then the question is, who forgot? So if the inner person forgot, so now he can't relinquish his rights to the inner people because, again, as I mentioned, the Eruv is on the outside. So it's not really connected to the people that are on the inside. And he can't relinquish his rights to the outside people because we just said that it's not clear if you can relinquish rights from one courtyard to another, right? Again, as I mentioned, these are 2 adjacent courtyards. Even though they are connected, they're not one unit. And therefore, you might not be able to relinquish rights from the inner to the outer. Let's say the outer person forgot. Now, he can't relinquish his rights to the outer people because that's not enough, because these inner people are going to walk through the outside courtyard. And this is called Drisat HaRegel, right? Meaning the fact that, and they did it very nicely here, they made like this path. The fact that the inner courtyard people have to walk through the outer courtyard basically says we're connected to you even though we're not here, right? And he can't relinquish his rights to the inner courtyard because, again, it's a different courtyard. What if the Eruv was put on the inside? So we have the flip, right? Again, if it's the inner person who forgot, so everybody is asur. Why? Because, again, he can't relinquish his rights to the outer people because it's a different courtyard. However, and here is a good one, the inner people, if it's the outer person who forgot, again, the Eruv is on the inside, one of the outer people forgot, the inner people can actually close this door and say, you know what? We are our own courtyard. And now the inner people can carry, the outer people cannot carry. So I'm sorry if that was very complicated, but I think that it's just interesting to see how this really worked, in a real case. The Gemara continues on 67, and I also loved how it starts. It talks about the relationship between Rav Chisda and Rav Sheshet. These were two very great sages, and it says that each one was intimidated by the other. Why? Because Rav Chisda was very sharp. He had a very sharp intellect, and he used to ask very good questions. So that got Rav Sheshet very nervous. And Rav Sheshet was very baki. He was very learned in his Tanaitic sources, in the Mishnah. So he knew a lot of the background to all of these discussions. So that made Rav Chisda very nervous. So actually, Rav Chisda is going to ask a question, and he asks the question that is this that we see here. So we're on 67. Rav Chisda asks, what happens if I have two houses? And we have seen this case before. I have two houses on either side of a public domain, of Reshut HaRabim. And what happens if they went to sleep at night, and when they woke up in the morning, the non-Jews built a wall around their two houses? So now, in theory, there is a wall around their houses, but they didn't make an Eruv. So what do we do? So Rav Chisda says, what do we do? So one opinion is, according to Shmuel, they cannot relinquish rights, mivatel, from one to the other, because they couldn't have made an Eruv before Shabbat. And because they couldn't make an Eruv before Shabbat, they can't do bitul. They can't relinquish rights on Shabbat. Or maybe they can, because now they are in one, kind of one area, in a private area, and maybe it works. The Gemara actually says no, it doesn't work, and they cannot carry between these two houses. What happens if you lived with a non-Jew, and then remember we said that makes us not able to carry on Shabbat in our courtyard? What happens if he died on Shabbat? Now, can everybody else, now we didn't make an Eruv, so then how about everybody relinquishes rights to one person, and then maybe now it's as if only one person lives in the courtyard, and now at least that person can carry. Again, it's a machloket. Rav Sheshet says yes. Rav Hamnuna says no. Our next case is interesting. What happens if we have a whole bunch of houses? I actually thought that they were living around one courtyard. In this picture, they have it around an alleyway, but it doesn't really matter. But what happens if, again, we have a non-Jew living with us? And as we said, that messes up our Eruv. But if he has a separate entrance or exit to like a field behind the house, even if it's very small, and even if, and they drew it very well, even if he has camels going in and out of the either alleyway or the courtyard, we still say that he does not forbid our area to make an Eruv. The fact that he has his own private exit or entrance means that he can use that, and therefore is considered as if he doesn't live with us in our either courtyard or alleyway. Because the Gemara says that people prefer a private exit as opposed to going through the public one. What happens if his private exit is to a karpaf, which was like this, right, an unused area or an area that was not used for residence? So the Gemara says that if it's small, meaning up to Beit Sa'atayim, then again, it doesn't forbid, the same case as this one here. However, if it's larger, then, if it's small, then it does forbid, because again, the non-Jew is not going to want to go out to that small area. He'd rather use the main entrance. But if it is to a larger area that's larger than Beit Sa'atayim, he does not forbid the area. What happens if it's a Jew, right? Again, a Jew, let's say, forgets to join the Eruv, and now, again, we mentioned if someone forgets to join the Eruv, he now complicates everything for everybody. But let's say he has that extra opening to the karpaf on the other side. So now it's actually going to be the opposite, and it's interesting why. For the non-Jew, if it's a small area, he's not going to use it. If it's large, he's going to use it. For the Jew, it's actually the opposite, because if it's a smaller area up to Beit Sa'atayim, he's allowed to carry there, and therefore he will use that exit, and therefore we can now all use our courtyard. However, if it's larger than Beit Sa'atayim, if you remember a few weeks ago we discussed, you're not allowed to carry in that area, and therefore he's going to have to use the courtyard or the alleyway, and therefore he forbids us. So it's interesting to see the difference between the Jew and the non-Jew. Okay, from here we talk about what happens. Hold on, I have a picture for you. What happens if you have a rock in the middle of the water? It seems to be a sea. Maybe we'll call it a small island. But as we mentioned in Masechet Shabbat, the sea is a karmelit, as you can see here. Karmelit is, remember we said, is not public, not private. Right, so it's not Reshut HaRabim, not Reshut HaYachid. It's separate. It's right. So karmelit, and we have a rock. So the question is, what is the status of this rock? So we say that if it's at least 4 by 4, and if it is above 10 tfachim, then it is its own private domain, and you can carry in that private domain. You cannot transfer from that private domain to the sea because, again, the sea is karmelit and the rock is a private domain. If, however, as you could see here in the picture, if it is less than 10 tfachim, it is now considered like the water, and it is a karmelit, and now you can transfer from the rock to the water. What happens if the rock, one second, hold on. Okay, what happens if the rock, again, you can see, I can't see it so well. I hope you can see it. Right, so if the rock is larger, now it becomes a Reshut HaYachid. You can carry within it, but you cannot transfer to the water because now it's Reshut HaYachid as opposed to the karmelit. Okay. From here, we have interesting stories. We're at the bottom of 67. We have a few interesting stories about baby boys that need to have a brit milah. They need to have a circumcision. It's their 8th day. And we learned, we learned in Masechet Shabbat that part of the Brit Milah ceremony, let me take that. It's not part of the ceremony, but in order to have the Brit Milah, it seems that it was customary to wash the baby in warm water. Again, I don't think it was part of the ceremony. I think it was a health issue. They wanted to wash the baby. So it seems that at least for sure in Shabbat, in Masachat Shabbat, and also on this daf, it seems that it is an integral part of the Brit Milah that there needs to be hot water. Just for nowadays, we don't do such a thing. So I think it was more just a health issue. So the question is, at the bottom of 67, there's a baby before the Brit, and the hot water spilled. And now what are we going to do? So the Gemara says that, and there was no Eruv. So Rabbah basically says to a non-Jew who happens to be there, go to my house. I have some hot water there, and you can bring it to the baby so that we can do the Brit Milah. Interesting, just parenthetically, the Gemara says that if you think that your rabbi made a mistake about a law that is biblical, then you need to stop him and say, and ask him about it. But if it is rabbinic in origin, meaning it's dirabbanan, it's better to wait till after they do it, and then you can ask the question. So I just thought it was just interesting parenthetical statements, but I think that has implication nowadays. Okay, let's go back to our case. The Gemara says. Did you
say Rabbanan twice? Was the first one Doraita and the second one Rabbanan?
Correct. The first one was Deoraita, biblical in origin, and the second is rabbinic in origin. Yes, thank you, if I misspoke. The Gemara then asks, how is it possible that he could ask the non-Jew to bring the hot water? As we know, we really are not supposed to ask non-Jews to do forbidden actions for us on Shabbat. And on the top of 68, the Gemara says, heat up the water, that would be problematic. Rather, he just asked him to bring it from the other house, and therefore it is okay. The Gemara asks, why didn't they have an Eruv in the first place? A few answers are given. One is that it was beneath the dignity of the Rosh Yeshiva, right, of the head, the great rabbi, to go around from house to house to ask for, the bread or food to make an Eruv. The other was that he was actually very poor, and he couldn't actually share his food with everybody else, because the idea of Eruv is that I need to put my food in like a communal area, and if somebody wants to take from it or partake from it, then you have to let them. Otherwise, it's as if you haven't really given the food. So it seems that they don't make an Eruv, so that's just interesting to think about why. The next conversation on 68 is, can I use food that's in a storage vessel, right? Let's say I have a big barrel of vinegar. Now I want to give a little bit for the Eruv, but it's in one big barrel. Can I say part of this barrel is for the Eruv? This brings us to a little bit of a confusing concept, which is breira. We have, I think, spoken about this before. The concept of breira is retroactive designation, meaning at the moment, I do not know which part of the barrel of vinegar is going to be for the Eruv, but let's say I want to use some of it for my salad. I can say, I'm going to use this. It must be that everything else is for the Eruv, not this. Meaning later on, it becomes clear what I meant previously. That's called breira. Some people say that it works. meaning I can retroactively designate something. Other sages say, no, if I need to designate something, I need to designate it clearly right now. I can't wait for something in the future that will determine it. And that's just an interesting concept that we will see a few times in the Gemara. It actually brings up a case. I'll say quickly. It brings up a case, a famous case of Brera, is this idea that if a person unfortunately dies in a house, we know that brings tum'ah, impurity, to the house. However, let's say there's only one door, if you know that you're going to take the person, the deceased, out of that door, then we know that all other doorways are going to be pure, tahor, because I know that I'm going to go through this door to take him out. Let's say there are a lot of doors and I'm not sure which door I'm going to go through. Brera will say that the minute I take the deceased out of one door, it now makes all the other doors pure. Right? Meaning the fact that when I use one door, now I'm retroactively saying all the other doors are okay. Right? So some sages say that works. Other sages say, no, I have to know before the person died which door I was going to take him out of. So that's just an interesting aside. Back to babies and their hot water that spill. Another solution, right? One solution we had was the non-Jew who can bring the water. Another solution, Rava says, why don't we ask the mother if she'd like some hot water to drink? And because she is still what we would call a cholah, right? She is sick in the sense that we are allowed to do things for her health. So since we can heat up water for her, now we'll have hot water for the baby. Another option is, hold on, I have a picture for you. Another option was where Rava said, I actually have hot water in my house. Here's a picture, right? So we have two courtyards. This courtyard is where the baby lives. He lives in a nice house with a roof. This courtyard is where Rava lives. And here's the hot water in a barrel. Here is where Rava lives, and he lives in this like outer room, and the women's room, which I thought was very interesting, is in the back of the house. And he basically says, you know what? I will relinquish my rights from my chatzer, my courtyard. I will move all my stuff into the women's area. And now you can come in and take, and now it's as if like only the baby's family lives in this entire area. Now you can come in and take the hot water. They ask, why does he have to move his things? The answer is, lest he forget that he relinquished his rights, and then lest he take his things into the courtyard, which he's not allowed to do because now he's only a guest. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Okay, let's talk about, okay, hold on one second. So this brings us to the question, right? What happens, we're at the bottom of 68, what happens if someone relinquished their rights, was mivatel, right? Relinquished his rights to his courtyard, but then he forgot, and then, or she forgot, and then carried her things into the courtyard. What happens now, right? Is it, Rabbi Meir says, it doesn't matter whether she did it on purpose or by accident. She now basically forbids everybody from carrying in the courtyard because you relinquished your rights and now you just used it. So it shows that you didn't relinquish your rights. Rabbi Yehuda says no, only if you do it on purpose. If you do it on purpose, then it shows that you didn't want to give up your rights. But if you did it by accident, you just forgot. So now it's basically okay. The next question is, what happens if you live with a tzduki? This is an interesting conversation. to remind us, a tzduki is a Sadducee from the time of the Second Temple period and probably a little bit later. The Sadducees were a group of Jews, which is very important to recognize. They were a group of Jews that were a sect that did not recognize rabbinic authority, and therefore they only kept biblical law, the oraita. They did not keep dirabanan. They did not keep rabbinic law. So now our question at the bottom of 68 and onto 69 is this tzduki, is he considered like a non-Jew because he's not keeping the laws, or is he considered like a Jew? Meaning, can he relinquish rights, or not? Meaning, and therefore he's like a non-Jew, and you actually have to rent the property from him. So the Gemara basically says on the top of 69 that like you have to quickly take your things out and put them in the alleyway, lest the Sadducee, the tzduki, uses it first. So we're not sure really if he is considered a Jew or not. And now we have a very interesting conversation on what is and the phrase used in the Gemara is mumar. Mumar is somebody who is a Jew who denies Judaism, let's say, right? Or does not keep the laws, but on purpose, I guess we'll say. Right? Meaning, and what does that mean? Right? That he, we could say a secular Jew, somebody who doesn't keep the laws. What does that entail? So the Gemara discusses, are we talking about someone who transgresses the Shabbat in public versus somebody who does it in private? What about somebody who the Gemara says is gilui panim, right? Meaning somebody who is brazen, somebody who is doing it on purpose. And the Gemara basically says that if a person denies Judaism brazenly, then that person cannot relinquish rights in the courtyard because he is giving up his rights as a law-abiding Jew, which is interesting. But, says the Gemara, if the person is embarrassed by not keeping Shabbat, then he can relinquish rights to the courtyard on Shabbat because we see that he cares about the laws of Shabbat. Just maybe it's too difficult for him. Interesting. And then the Gemara talks about, right, we accept the sacrifices, the korbanot of Jews who have sinned, right? Again, we want to encourage people to repent, to keep the laws, right? We don't want to say we're not going to encourage their sacrifices. And therefore, it seems that a mumar, this person who we're not going to let relinquish his rights, is going to be somebody who publicly desecrates the Shabbat or is an idol worshiper. And therefore, right, again, a Jew who worships idolatry. Okay, from here we're going to start a new Mishnah. And the Mishnah basically says that if one person forgot to join in the Eruv, his house is forbidden to him, meaning he can't carry into the courtyard, and to the people in the courtyard as well. But their houses are permitted, right? If they gave their rights to the courtyard to him, then he can carry, right? It's as if he is the only one who lives in the courtyard, and he can carry, but they cannot carry, and we'll explain why in 1 minute. The last clause is if two people forgot to be part of the Eruv, then they forbid each other, because only one person can receive the rights and not two. And we're going to talk about this on the next daf. First, let's understand. First of all, when do you relinquish rights? When are we mevatel the reshut? Beit Shammai says you have to do it before Shabbat. You cannot do it on Shabbat because it seems like it's really a transaction. Beit Hillel say, no, you can even do it on Shabbat. We'll see a little bit later why that is. Okay. From here, the Gemara says, again, reviews the idea of if you were mivatel and then you took something out. Again, as we mentioned before, depends if you do it on purpose or by accident. And now the Gemara talks about if one relinquishes his right to the courtyard, but not to his house, then that works according to the sages, to Chachamim, right? So when you are mivatel, right, what's the mechanism? When I relinquish my rights to the courtyard, basically I'm saying I'm just a guest. I don't live here anymore. And therefore, now I can carry because I don't live here anymore, right? But as I mentioned before, if a few people want to relinquish their rights to one person, that doesn't work. Why? So the Gemara actually says, and I thought, again, this is very interesting, the Gemara basically says one person can be a guest in the courtyard, but many people cannot be the guests of one person. So I thought that's just very interesting because myself and many of my friends have many guests on a Shabbat, but I guess in Talmudic times, maybe that was not the case. And therefore, one person can give his rights over to everybody else, but they cannot give over their rights to more than one person. So I thought that was interesting. Again, as we mentioned, if two people didn't join, then everybody is forbidden because they cannot relinquish rights one to the other. Okay, we are now at the top of 70, and here, at least for me, I thought it was a little confusing, so I actually made you this chart. I hope you can see it. But basically, we actually have 7 cases because Eruvin wasn't complicated enough. We have 7 cases that are brought up on Daf Ayin and 70. And the first 4 work, meaning they are mechanisms that are permitted. The last 3 are mechanisms that do not work, and therefore it is not permitted. So let's go through these cases. Again, we're living in a courtyard with numerous houses that open up into one courtyard. So if one person didn't make an Eruv, so then he can give the rights to one person who did, right? So again, that's bitul. You're relinquishing your rights to one person, right? If 2 people who did make their Eruv, they can give their rights to one person who didn't. Again, as I mentioned, 2 who did, 1 who wasn't part of the Eruv. And then it's as if only one person lives in the courtyard, and that works. Case number 3, 2 people did not make the Eruv. They can give, or again, they weren't part of the Eruv. There was a larger Eruv, right? 2 people who didn't make an Eruv can give their rights to 2 people who did make an Eruv. That does work. And now, 4, 2 people who didn't make an Eruv can give rights to 1 who did. Okay, so those are the 4 cases that work. Let's go to the 3 cases that do not work. 1 person who made an Eruv can't give the rights to 1 who didn't make an Eruv. We're going to explain that in a minute. 2 people who made an Eruv can't give rights to 2 who didn't, because as I mentioned before, if they give their rights to, you can't give your rights to 2 people, you can only give your rights to 1 person if they didn't make an Eruv. So that mechanism does not work. And again, 2 people who didn't make an Eruv can't give the rights to 2 who did. I'm sorry if it's confusing. That's just what the Gemara says. But let's explain a little bit. Again, case number 1, the Gemara says, is actually, what's the case? There were actually 3 people who lived in the courtyard, but one of them died. And now you can give, right, again, the person who didn't join in the Eruv can now give his rights to one who did, because they're the only two people who are now living in the Chatzer. The Gemara says also that, again, all right, so number 5 is also here as a parallel to number 1, right? Again, in the beginning we said one who didn't can now give rights to one who did, but the opposite is not true, meaning that one who made an Eruv can't give rights to one who didn't. What did you ask? 3 and 7. 2 who didn't make an Eruv can give rights to 2 who did. 2 who didn't make an Eruv can't give rights to 2 who did. You are correct. Why is that the case? Hold on. 2 who didn't make an Eruv can't give reshut to 2 who did. 1 second, please. 2 who weren't ma'ariv can give reshut to 2 who were. That is an excellent question. I will have to look into that. You are correct. It does seem to say the same thing. I'm not sure why that is. I will look into that. Okay. Let's come back. I will have to look into that. You raise an excellent point. Okay. From here, I'll look into that and get back to you. From here, it seems that, 1 second, might have thought that 2 can be mevatel to 1 or 2 of them and then hand it over. Sorry, 1 second. 2 who didn't. Okay, I'm not sure. I will get back to you. From now we're going on to another concept, which is what about an heir? Meaning somebody who acquires the house through an inheritance. Can he now relinquish his rights to the people who live in the courtyard, right? So again, the original owner did not make an Eruv, and then he died on Shabbat. Can the heir relinquish his rights to the property? And again, we have a machloket. Rav Nachman says yes, and the Beit Midrash of Shmuel says no, meaning the question is, how do we view the heir or not? Is he just a continuation of the person, right, I guess his father, or not necessarily? Okay, and then, the Gemara is going to continue on 71 to talk about Jews and a Jew who lives in the courtyard with a convert. Here, just important to recognize, a convert is used in the Gemara because when a convert dies, if he does not have children, his property now becomes ownerless, what we call hefker. And therefore, anybody who comes is allowed to acquire his property. So it's an interesting case, because most Jews, when they die, have some sort of heir. Either it's children, or it's a parent, or it's a brother. If not, it's a cousin. A convert, again, according to Jewish law, doesn't necessarily have other relations who are Jewish, and therefore, obviously, if the convert, after he converts, has children, obviously those children are heirs. We're talking about if he does not have children. So what happens if that convert dies before Shabbat, right? If another Jew acquires his property, then he forbids everybody from carrying in the courtyard. If he died on Shabbat, even if nobody acquires the property, everybody can still carry in the courtyard, right? And the Gemara explains, right, even if the person acquires the property on Shabbat, because he could have, again, if the person died before Shabbat, he could have acquired it before Shabbat and made an Eruv. The fact that he acquires it on Shabbat and didn't make an Eruv makes it forbidden to carry in the courtyard. Now, again, the question is, let's not get confused. Even if he does forbid everybody to carry, he can always relinquish his rights. Again, not always. According to Beit Shammai, he had to have done so before Shabbat, but according to Beit Hillel, he could do so on Shabbat. And again, as I mentioned briefly before, but here the Gemara actually spells it out, right? According to Beit Shammai, it is an actual transfer of the property, whether it's a formality or not. It's still a transfer, and therefore cannot be done on Shabbat and needs to be done before Shabbat. Beit Hillel say it's actually just a withdrawal of my rights, and therefore, as I keep saying, relinquishing rights, and therefore you can do that on Shabbat because I can always withdraw from an area on Shabbat. That's not, that's not a business transaction, and therefore he says it's okay to do it on Shabbat. From here we have a Mishnah that talks about a person who has partners, and if they're in a partnership already, which is called a shituf, do they still need to do what's called shituf nivo'ot? So just to remind us, we've been talking about Eruv chatzerot, an Eruv that unites everybody in a courtyard. When we want to do the same thing in an alleyway, in a mavoi, the word is different. The word is shituf. Shituf means a partnership. And I think that play on words is important because the Mishnah basically asks, what if I'm already in a partnership with somebody? Do I have to make another partnership for our alleyway? And the Mishnah talks about, well, is my partnership with the wine, or is it with one person with wine and another person with oil? And here we're going to actually discuss the case. I have another picture for you. Okay, so the Gemara says basically, what is the case that we're talking about? Again, the Mishnah talks about this one with wine and this one with wine, or this one with wine and this one with oil. So one option is that we're talking about a case that we actually saw a while ago, which was these 3 courtyards that live on 2 alleyways. So you can see here there are 2 outer courtyards, a courtyard in the middle, and 2 alleyways that connect the courtyards. So the question is, what happens if the middle courtyard has a partnership, a shituf, again, which is another word for eruv, with the courtyard on the right with wine, but with the courtyard on the left with oil? Does that work? And Rabbi Shimon says it does work. Again, they're permitted to carry into the center. The center is permitted to carry to the outside, but those red arrows explain that the 2 outer courtyards cannot carry to each other. But they are all permitted to the center. Or, says the Gemara, no, we're actually talking about 1 alleyway, so not this case, rather 1 alleyway and 2 courtyards. And we are trying to say, what if 1 person brought oil and 1 person brought wine? And the question is, and I think it's specifically wine and oil because they physically cannot mix. And is the whole point of being in a shituf, being in an eruv together, is about combining our food, and oil and wine don't mix, and therefore it doesn't work. And here the Gemara, again, as I mentioned before, gives us a fundamental concept, which I think we've always known, but it's nice to see it in print finally. So it says here that an eruv, right, again, in our courtyard must be done or should be done with bread, And the question is why? And the answer is because bread is about sharing a residence. What are we doing in our courtyard? We're saying we all live, it's as if we all live in one house. How do I show my residence? And that's going to be the next daf, bread, right? My food. So therefore, food is used for the Eruv in the courtyard, and wine is used for a shituf, for the Eruv that's going to be done in the alleyway, because that's not about residence. I'm not saying that I live in the alleyway. Rather, I'm saying we're all in this together, and that could be done with wine. Now the question is, what if I do the shituf of the alleyway with bread? Could it count as the Eruv not only for the alleyway, but also for the courtyard? And that's going to be a machloket at the bottom of 71 to the top of 72. And basically this idea of could it count, again, if I use bread, or what if I use wine? Can it count for my courtyard as well? And that is a machloket. And here, I think we actually saw it last week, if not 2 weeks ago. We have a very interesting idea that says, well, the halacha is like Rabbi Meir, or the minhag, the custom, right? So either the law is like Rabbi Meir, or the custom is like Rabbi Meir, or people used to do like Rabbi Meir, right? And the explanation is, what are these three different ideas? One is, if I say the law is like Rabbi Meir, it means we actually teach it from the podium, or write it in a book, or tell everybody about it. If we say that it's the custom, then it's not something that is taught publicly. Rather, if you ask the rabbi the question, then the rabbi will give you this answer, but it's more private. And nahagu means if people do it, so we don't stop them. So it's like very different ways to relate to the law and how it is taught, or how it is, I think, disseminated to the people. Okay, from here we have another case, our last case, which is 5 groups of people are decide to go away for Shabbat and spend their time in, I guess we would call it a hotel. But this is a very interesting hotel because it's basically one big room where there are dividers. Of course, the Gemara is going to talk about these dividers in a minute. So there's some sort of dividers in the room. It's 5 groups of people, and they're in a courtyard with other people. You can see the other houses as well. The question is, who needs to make an Eruv? How do we make an Eruv? Beit Shammai say you need to make an Eruv between themselves, meaning they themselves, those 5 groups, need to make an Eruv, and with the people in the courtyard. Beit Hillel say no, because they're all living in one big hall, they do not need to make an Eruv, and one person can be like a delegate to make an Eruv with the other people in the courtyard, right? But Beit Hillel say that if they're in separate rooms, what we would call nowadays in a hotel, then, or like in an attic, like somewhere else, then you must make an Eruv, everybody together. There's a machloket what these walls are. You can see in the picture. Maybe they're flimsy walls. Maybe they only reach 10 tfachim high. Maybe they go all the way up to the ceiling. Maybe they're proper walls. Again, I thought a very interesting line, and I think I just want to mention it, is that the line is koach dehetera adif. It's like in the middle of 72. The words mean the power of being lenient is preferable, meaning the Gemara wants to show the power of Beit Hillel and how lenient they are willing to go, and not to show the power of Beit Shammai to show how stringent they can be. And I think the lesson to us is it's very easy to be stringent, right? It's very easy to say this is forbidden and this is forbidden. It's much harder, or it takes broader shoulders to say this is okay. And therefore the Gemara wants to say, Beit Hillel will say, even if there are real walls in this hall, they still view it as one big room, and therefore they do not need to make one Eruv. And I just thought it's just interesting to think about being lenient and being stringent. Okay. From here, we have a Braita that says that the Mishnah is actually talking about bringing the Eruv to a different house in a different Chatzer, or maybe it's when the people in the Chatzer bring the Eruv to this hall. Okay. From here, our last Mishnah for the day. I hope everybody's still with me. I'm sorry that this is quite complicated. I'm trying to simplify. But again, another fundamental question: what determines residence? It's so lovely that on 72 that's what we're discussing. But again, where am I considered to be residing? Is it where I sleep, or is it where I eat? This has practical applications, one being, where do I light the Shabbat candles? Do I light it where I'm sleeping? Let's say I'm going to eat somewhere else. Maybe I should light it where I'm eating. So that's an interesting question. The Gemara brings it up with children and parents. As we know, in the time of the Mishnah, the Gemara, even in the old villages, family units tended to stay together even after children got married. So the case in the Mishnah is a family, like the parents, and the married children all live in one courtyard. So, and the Mishnah says that the children eat at the parents' house. But they sleep in their own houses. Do they need to make an Eruv or not? So it seems that they do need to make an Eruv, and if not, they can relinquish rights. Yes, excellent. Hanukkah candles as well. Yes, Lynn. Or maybe the case is not that they eat with the parents every Shabbat. Rather, the parents, the mother basically cooks for everybody and then delivers the food, meaning the food comes from the parents, but they're eating it in their homes. And then there seems to not be a need to make an Eruv. Also, if nobody else is if nobody else is in the Chatzer, in the courtyard, they do not need to make an Eruv. The Gemara says it seems like sleeping is what determines your residence. And then the Gemara rejects that and says, no, maybe it's actually where you sleep. It's where you eat. And therefore, talks about different places that one could live. It needs to be a place of residence, or a place where you eat. And we're going to continue this discussion in next week, talking about a place of residence or it's where I sleep. And as Lynn mentioned, it's also a conversation for Hanukkah candles. Also, actually, an interesting case is also in Israel on Purim, if you live near Jerusalem, because in Jerusalem you keep what's called Shushan Purim, which is the next day, not when everybody else is keeping Purim. And the halacha, the law says that it's basically where you're sleeping. So if you sleep in Jerusalem on Purim night, then you keep wherever you're sleeping. So if it's in Jerusalem, then you keep Purim like Jerusalem. If you sleep outside, then it's outside. So that is interesting. Wait, Lynn asked me a question, but I didn't read it. So basically, the intention to honor the Shabbat is key here. If there was an option to prepare for Shabbat and one just ignore it, they cannot come back on Shabbat and expect accommodation. It's an interesting question because, again, Beit Hillel seems to say that you can relinquish your rights on Shabbat. It seems that you're right. Everybody agrees you should do all of these preparations before Shabbat. But if you forgot or you got distracted and you couldn't, Beit Hillel will still say that you can relinquish rights on Shabbat. Beit Shammai say no. You needed to do it before. It's an actual transaction, and you cannot do it on Shabbat. So I hope that answers your question. Wait, I see a few more. Maybe it has something to do with where people gather together, especially if distinguishing between one room and another. Excellent. Yes. Again, Alana brings up a good point. Again, the idea of Eruv is we're all coming together, and it is over food. So it seems like we're talking about where we eat. However, one can say, I keep my food where I sleep. So it could also be where I sleep, but that's going to be a cliffhanger for next week to see what we're going to say is the actual law. Lisa adds, except for those of us who moved around to get 2 Purims. Yes, Lisa, you're right. You can actually move around and keep 2 days of Purim. You can sleep outside of Jerusalem the first night and sleep in Jerusalem the second night and hear Megillah 4 times and give Mishloach Manot twice and have a party. So yes, it does work. Excellent. So thank you, everyone. Unless again, sorry, it was complicated this week, but I know, sorry. But I'm trying to organize it. As I can. So wishing everybody.
You do an excellent job, Rabbi. Thank you for trying. Thank God you don't test me on this. That's all.
I agree. If there was a test, that would be very difficult. That would be very difficult.